With great power comes great responsibility. It's a proverb popularized by the famous comic of Spider-Man, written by Stan Lee. This sentence was actually pronounced by the uncle of Peter Parker. The regulation regarding the protection of personal data revolves around this sentence. Whoever manages the information related to a person must perceive the power she has, and therefore her action has to be governed by principles and responsibilities. Privacy, first of all, protects the dignity of people. This is why it's such an important right. Even when in everyday activity and life, it's taken for granted or perceived as a bureaucratic burden. The European legislator is a world leader in that. Our discipline, which dates back to 1995, and more recently defined by the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, represents one of the best regulatory examples in this sense, as it guarantees the rights of individuals. Despite of some limitations, of course, we should be proud of that. There are several various meanings and dimensions of privacy. One of these is the so-called decisional privacy. The awareness of being monitored leads us to change our behavior. The most fitting example of this is the so-called, the very famous panopticon of Bentham, a prison with a radial structure where a single watchtower controls all the cells. The prisoners are not sure that the guard is looking at them, but the mere possibility leads them to not violate the rule, therefore to conform to a certain type of behavior. One person controls everybody. Our societies, however, have gradually become a sort of synopticon. Many persons control everybody, or rather, everybody is controlled by everybody else. This has direct impact on our personal identity, on the social projection of the individual's personality, which is linked to an interest of the subject to be represented with her true identity, to not see modified or blurred her intellectual heritage and ideological and professional ethics. In the digital context, the reflection of this is what we call digital identity. In an era where data represents everything, where somebody is talking about data is the region of data, where everything is governed by algorithms, and the individual is no longer a user of the services offered online, but becomes herself a product, the human being is commodified. Here, privacy is perhaps the last bulwark, the last bastion to protect our personal and digital identity. To come to our particular period, the right to privacy was born as a principle that must necessarily be balanced in different application contexts. In this scenario, it's precisely balanced with security and public health, which depend on various variables, including, for example, the historical context. Public safety, public health, the maintenance of our healthcare system are principles which, if properly balanced, can determine a temporary limitation of our privacy. Everything must always be inspired, of course, by some key principles of the system, stated by Article 5 in the GDPR: lawfulness, fairness, and transparency, data minimization, proportionality. Therefore, the historical moment, the serious situation of contingency can legitimize more invasive forms of control and monitoring. The Italian Data Protection Authority, as the European Commission, has had the opportunity to intervene in evaluation regarding use of new technologies and the internet to counter the COVID-19 epidemiological emergency. Monitoring through telephone data, for example, through apps used more or less voluntarily. The state of emergency can then legitimize, albeit limited in time and in well-defined ways, forms of control of this type. Proportionality, fair-sightedness, and reasonableness are key components of any such measures, of course, along with their temporary nature. Before closing this brief thought, allow me a provocation that is always valid in this context. We rightly worry about how invasive a measure of this type can be in a context of exceptional gravity, envisaged through a system that we consider democratic and put in place by public bodies. We do not worry or scandalize as much when this type of control is carried out by private players, by the big names of the net, by large companies that constantly monitor our lives in a more invasive and certainly less transparent way. To conclude, when we evaluate the possible fallout in terms of privacy of organizational and technological solutions that aim to respond to national security needs, we must consider that there is a line, a border that separates a civil and democratic state from a dictatorial one. the freedom and the dignity of citizens. It's therefore important for our societies to set this ultimate limit, since freedom is also a question linked to a necessary balance in that context. Quoting the Data Protection Authority, we could say, the risk to be averted is that of mistaking the waiver of freedoms for effectiveness and the blind confidence in algorithms for the all-powerful solution.